I like the idea of a racing car. It could be an aircraft if you prefer, but a racing car would presumably spend more of its life on the blocks, being tinkered with and tampered with and adjusted and fine-tuned. More time, I would think, than it spends racing around the track. So if you think about what we pianists need to do, we need to be able to perform. Of course, we need to be able to race our car around the track. But we also need to know how to maintain it. Now, if you play a piece over and over and over again, it will start to deteriorate from the motor point of view. In other words, you'll find your fingers doing all sorts of things that you didn't particularly want them to do and that the composer hadn't thought of. In other words, motor control starts to deteriorate with repeated playthroughs. So does the ear. If the ear gets used to a particular way of something sounding, it will habituate to it, and you will start to notice a drop-off. So, it's all to do with tinkering under the engine, under the bonnet, as we say in the UK, under the hood, as you say in the US. Which calls to play the craft of practicing and the art of practicing and also the science of practicing. I'm going to introduce you first to my feedback loop, which is called plan, play, judge. There are three elements to this feedback loop. So before we start practicing, it's very important to know what it is we're going to do in our practice. I'm thinking about the chimp. Who was it that wrote that wonderful book about the chimp? We've all got an inner chimp, which will kind of do what it feels like. It won't particularly be responsible. It'll kind of fool around. You'll find yourself noodling. Who's had that happen to them after a while? You're practicing and then you suddenly find your fingers doing something that's completely not what you'd wanted, and certainly not what it says on the page. And then you bring yourself back and you say, yeah, okay. So the idea of the plan box or the plan stage, decide exactly what you're going to play and how. In other words, it could be, I'm going to play my left hand under the speed for half a page, and I'm going to really listen to that it's even and regular. You take a few minutes, not a few minutes, a few seconds, a few moments to focus, and then you evaluate your result. Is what I played what I intended to play? If yes, you decide whether you're going to repeat that. Some people love repetition, but be very mindful about the repetition. If you're going to repeat, go back into a new plan stage before you do your play. If the result of B didn't match A and you're not happy, see if you can be as precise as possible about what it was. And I've got a few examples of this. But the idea is that you'd feed back into a new plan box what it is you want to achieve in the play box, the B stage, so that you're constantly feeding back. And this is what people don't do in the practice. I've often noticed this as I kind of eavesdrop outside institutional practice room doors. They just kind of hack away at it. But here we go. Now I've got the first thing is the ultra slow practice speed, which is really difficult to do. I often ask people in a lesson, can you show me your slow practice speed? And what'll happen more times than not is that somebody will start off slightly under the tempo, but then by about the fourth bar they'll have cracked back up to it. So what I'm thinking of with this is something that one of my colleagues actually coined this phrase, my dear colleague Lucinda Mackwith-Young, the speed of no mistakes. And what we've got here, this is something from a wonderful book by Tilly Fleischman. I mean, isn't that a great name? Tradition and Craft in Piano Playing. And she was around at the Liszt time. She was, I think, taught by a student of Liszt. So we're talking about the Lisztian era. The first phrase is taken by itself, or if the work is especially difficult, even less than a complete phrase, and played so slowly that approximately 3 seconds might be counted between each successive note or chord. I'm just pausing for a minute just to let that sink in. That's extremely slow. Students who have the necessary knowledge should reflect on the tonality and harmonic structure of the passage, noting modulations and characteristic features. At the same time, one should, my screen is being covered by this thing, one should watch, right, every movement involved. So if you just look and see what that implies, the brain is, the conscious mind is involved, being involved in this. In other words, what key am I in? I call this thing PPR, personalized pattern recognition. What patterns can you spot? What's going on in the structure of the music, as best as you can personally notice. It's got to be meaningful to you. And she's also suggesting here that we keep a check on our body. In other words, every movement involved. Gaining speed. So let's say we've done a certain amount of work on our piece. Let's assume that it's a new piece for now. And I put myself through this process about a year ago. I was learning a piece by Clara Schumann, which I highly recommend, beautiful music. And it spins through the 2 or 3 pages of very fast right-hand semiquavers, that's 16th notes. And I put myself through this discipline of spending a number of days just working. Well, it wasn't so many days, maybe 2 or 3 days, just working really at the speed of no mistakes with no fast playing at all. But then, of course, we do need to gain the speed. We need to know how to get up to the speed. And there are 2 main ways of doing this. One is the incremental metronome approach, which is actually really tedious and it's pretty darned obvious. So I don't want to dwell on it for too long. But you first of all figure out what speed you can comfortably manage, you know, and then find what that is on the metronome. Let's say it's 60. And then you notch up the metronome to something like, it could be 65, until you can play it comfortably and fluently at that tempo before you then push up the metronome 1 notch further. Now the notch might be an increment of 5. I wouldn't recommend an increment of 1, otherwise you'll be there till Christmas. But this is the method favoured by a lot of people. I can remember Rosalind Turek talking about how she built up speed in her playing by doing just this. There is another way of doing it, which I prefer. I think it's far more direct. And it was called by my teacher, my last teacher, Nina Svetlanovic. She used to call it little bits fast. It's effectively chaining. But what you do is you start with just 2 or 3 notes. I feel a demonstration coming on. What I'll do is just let's go through this, and then I'll show you how this might work. So you start with just 2 or 3 notes, and you think of these 2 or 3 notes as a unit and playing 1 impulse, 1 gesture. And then you manage a few repetitions of this at full speed or close to the full speed. And above all, playing mechanically. What you want to do with this is to imagine, let's say, an old-fashioned record. We probably all of a generation where we remember long-playing records. And, you know, I'm sure we've all done this. We want to find a particular spot in the piece. So we lift the needle and put it down on the record, and to find out where we are. Then we realise, no, that wasn't quite it. And we move the needle along a little further. Oh, no, that's not quite it. And then we move. And each time we drop the needle, we're hearing a sound bite of a fully fledged performance. The sound bite's important because it contains all the energy of the music. It's the speed, it's the meaning of the music, it's the pedaling, it's the sound, everything. So you go on until you have a kind of longer sound bite by just adding a note. It could be 2 notes, whatever it might be. That feels right to you, and you go on adding notes until you feel like you have a section that's within your grasp, which could be just a couple of bars. Then you establish a new starting point. Let's say, since my analogy now, well, not the analogy, the idea there is for 2 bars. You start off on bar 3 and then make another chain that could be 2 bars long. So then you've got two bar phrases, two two small chains that you then put together and make one longer chain. When I was a student at the Royal College of Music, way back in the dim and distant past, we had one professor there who never let his students play their new pieces slowly. He did not allow slow practice, because he said, why are you wanting to use muscles that you're not going to use, or reflexes that you're not going to use? So don't spend any time at all in the slow practice. Now, this is not a view that I happen to subscribe to at all, but I do think there's a lot of validity in it. Don't spend too much time in the ultra slow practice at any given moment, but do it enough. I guess it's like a lot of other things. You know, a little glass of whiskey is lovely, but a big glass isn't particularly good for you. So you just use it in moderation. And I can remember when I was learning the Chopin B-flat minor sonata, the last movement moves literally this sort of... If I slow that down, both hands are in unison. It's very, very awkward, very, very difficult. So what is the value of the ultra slow practice? Well, the value of the ultra slow practice is that I can hear every single note, every interval. I can even vocalize. In other words, can I vocalize that diminished seventh? So I can concentrate on my dynamics, I can concentrate on my physical ease and comfort. But the idea of the fast chaining, or the little bits fast, would be this. You'd start off literally with one impulse, which might be, that happens to be a hand position, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 notes. So I'd play those 4 notes at the speed and at the dynamic of my intended finished performance. Now I noticed there was a little tension in my forearm, so when I do it again, I'm concentrating on my forearms. Very good. I noticed there that my left hand was a bit heavier than my right. Do you see me using the feedback loop now as I'm going along? Not happy with the third note of my left hand. Yes. Now I'm starting to get a little bit more what I want. See what I'm doing? I'm adding one note at a time until I arrive there. So then I finesse that little unit before I start the job on the second unit. This is... Then I could join the first 2 units together. You see how this works? And then what would happen is the worst thing you could then do would be to go over that slowly again. But what you would do is the next day you'd start that process again from scratch. So you literally start the chaining process from ground zero again. The next practice session, which could be later that day, or it could be the day after, and you'd apply a certain patience to this. You know, the thing with practice is you've got to be patient with. You've got to trust the process. You've got to be patient with yourself, and you've got to know that that Rome wasn't built in a day. These things are going to take time to establish. Oh yeah, this is an example that I was intending to use. So this is from the Chopin scherzo. It happens to be the scherzo that I was talking about. So the speed of no mistakes would be something like this. Notice that I didn't really bother with the forte. We don't need to practice loudly very often. Or rather, let me reframe that loud playing, passages that are marked forte or fortissimo, can most often be practiced lighter to avoid any kind of physical injury that might come from doing a lot of work at a strong dynamic level. It's unnecessary to practice strongly too often. So then, the speed of no mistakes, my chaining, what might it be? Well, it might just be those first 3 notes. Happy. I might go over the bar line. That's full speed. Now let me start a new impulse. Yeah, well, what I was not happy about just before that is I put the stress in the wrong place. I want the accent on the first note of the bar. Do you see how this would work? Or do you see how this does work? And you'd sit there with little silences in between each repetition, because I would be using my feedback loop. If I'm going to get the best value from this, I would say, now, why do I need to repeat it? Do I need to repeat it because it was good and I want to make a habit? Or do I want to repeat it because it wasn't good and I want to improve it? And if that's the case, give your servants, your fingers, an instruction, such as, put the stress on the first beat, please. Be very nice to your servants. You know, you want them to be happy in their job. But you've got to be very exacting too. The quality control. Don't let any sloppy stuff go past.